I can remember being 7 and 8, 9 years old, and we would go to church, and I'd come home and we'd run up in my room, and we would listen to my parents fight. And I could never understand why they wouldn't go to church, but why it was so important for us. My father was very abusive to me physically in other ways, and I hated him. And the highlight of my childhood pretty much was one day my father came in my room. I was 14 years old, and I had it. And so we got into a fight, and I beat him with a bat. And I was never to see my father again. And that was okay because I hated him. And I witnessed my mother take her own life. When I was 17 years old, my mother had mental health issues, and I don't ever remember being a kid. I had to take care of my sister and myself. I didn't accept help from others. And on that day when I beat my father, I went to the one thing that I knew that would relieve the pressure and the pain, emotional pain in my life, and I turned to alcohol. And it worked. And I'm not going to get into a whole lot of that, other than every time life was either good or bad, I took a drink. And eventually, me and my sister grow up, and my sister goes and lives with my cousins, and I go out on my own. And I hook up with a group of people that are doing what I'm doing. And I don't understand it, but I'm going to go do it with them because I've given up on life. I remember when I was like 12, I had just gone to church, and every time, even today when I walked in today, every time I gone to church, I always had this peaceful, warm feeling, like it was a place that I was supposed to be. But it's just somewhere where I never thought I would fit in. I didn't really believe that God would love a person. Every time I hear the song, and one of the songs that impacted my life and treatment was the song Amazing Grace. And when I hear that song today, it brings tears to my eyes because it was one of the turning points in my life. I heard that song when I was in my last treatment center at 38 years old. And I understand when it says it saves a wretch like me. I did not believe I was lovable or savable. And I remember sitting in that room at 8 and 10 years old praying to God, just because that was my normal, and just asking him to take it away. And the more I prayed, the more I got beat. And so I lost all touch. And I became a selfish, arrogant, self-centered person. And that worked for me because I don't want people to love me, and I don't want people to care about me. I prefer to be alone. Let me do what I want to do. I'm Irish and Catholic, so we kind of have a lot of kids. And I had a very large family, and they all drank. And except for my cousins, I had a couple cousins I was close with. And so what happens to me is I have some brushes with the law, and I came out, and I started working in the steel mills of Pittsburgh, and I was right around 23 years old, and I'm starting to drink daily. And here's what happens to me. At 23 years old, I had a grandfather. He lived in the Hill District of Pittsburgh. It's a very bad neighborhood. He never had any running water. He never really had any lights. I've never seen my grandfather dress up, and there was never food in the house. But he always had a bottle of Jack Daniels and a bag of weed. So I would go over there, and me and my grandfather would drink and get high together. And nobody else would visit him. And he was a very interesting man. He was in the war. He had a lot of experience. He was actually a godly man. He talked to God a lot. And one day he died. And I got a call from an attorney after the funeral, and he said they're going to read my grandfather's will. And I said, well, I don't really believe there's a whole lot to read in this will, based on the fact of how he lived his life. And he said, your grandfather was worth over $4 million. And because you never gave up on him, he wants you to have it. And what I come to find out that my grandfather had owned 3 apartment buildings, stocks and bonds, cash, retirements. He had it all. And what he was trying to do is figure out who would show him love. And I did. And 24 years old, I walked out of an attorney's office in downtown Pittsburgh with almost $3.9 million. And I stand here today to tell you it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And so I proceeded to do what I know how to do, which is to drink, do drugs. I really didn't know much about my mental health back then because they didn't talk about it. It was the 80s and everybody was a little off, so I just thought it was a little off. And God was far from my life. It was the last thing I've ever thought of. And so I was walking through downtown Pittsburgh and I saw a for sale sign, and it was a bar. It's really not a good idea for an alcoholic to buy a bar. It didn't go well, but I bought a bar. And I bought a very beautiful home in Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania. I got married a few times through there. I got some DUIs in the process. And out of that relationship came a daughter. And me and my daughter were close to each other for the first 8 years of her life. And as a series of events, as I started to get deeper into my addiction and mental health, dying on a daily basis was a good option for a guy like me. I saw no joy in life. I saw no happiness in life. I didn't know how to make friends. I didn't know how to be a friend. My mother was the only person, I believe, in my whole life that ever wanted to see me get better. And because of drugs and alcohol, I couldn't even show up for her funeral that I was to be a pallbearer at, because I was too busy feeling sorry for myself. So I buy this bar, and I go into a lifestyle that you may see on TV. I have the biggest cars, I have the biggest house, I have everything you could possibly need. I'm making more money than I know how to make. And slowly inside, I'm dying. I don't even know I'm dying, because I don't know for yourself, but for me, I thought once I get this, I'll be happy. Yeah. Once I have this much money, I'll be okay. Once I buy that house, I'll be happy. And my experience has been anything external outside of me is never going to make me happy. That happiness is an external, it's an internal thing. It's something that lives on the inside of me. It's my soul. It's where my heart is. And my heart is so broken, I don't have the ability to open it up to anything else, so I shut it down. And I go out through the world, I'm a fake and I'm a phony. And we'll just fast forward. She said she was going to take my daughter if I didn't stop drinking. And they were going to leave. And I still had everything. I had a lot of money in the bank. I owned a business. It was going well. But my drinking had been gotten to the place where I was drinking daily. I became a morning drinker. I blacked out when I drank. And I suffered from severe depression. By this time, I'm around 30 years old. I've been in 2 mental institutions. I was 302 by that woman because I had an anger problem. And I never touched her, but I threw a chair through a window. And when you throw a chair through a window, people will show up. And they committed me into a psych ward. And I had to have a hearing to get back out. And I stopped drinking for a little bit. And then I came home one day, and she was gone. She took my daughter, and they were gone. And I walked into an empty house. They had taken everything on the inside. I had gone away for the weekend on a golf trip. I like to play golf, still do. And when I came home, she emptied the whole house. And I was never to see them again. And all my years of sobriety, which are 28, I've never met my daughter, and I've never seen my grandchildren. And I blame God for that, by the way. And I just got angrier and angrier. And I continued down this spiral thing in my life. And eventually I did some things illegally, and all the money that I had in the bank because I didn't pay income tax was frozen. And it was a lot of money. And the house that I owned was repossessed. And I became homeless. I went from having all that money in the bank, inherited millions of dollars, owning a business, and my drinking and my alcoholism and my mental health were out of control. Every time I came out of an institution that was trying to help me and get me better, they would always talk about this thing called God, and they would always talk about living by these principles. And I'm like, that's not for me. It's not how I live my life. You're not going to tell me how to live my life. I'm going to live my life the way I want to live my life. And I don't really care. Now I know the difference today between God's will and man's will. I absolutely understand it. It took a while for me to get it, but I understand it now. And so I lived on the streets of Pittsburgh for 2 years. And I was homeless. And I hated everything about you, and I hated everything about me, and more importantly, I hated everything about God. And there were nights I would lay on this hillside by Three River Stadium, if you ever remember that. I lived on that hillside for almost 2 years. And I would watch people play in the park with their daughters and their dogs and their kids, and I would just get more madder and madder. And I would curse God, not realizing that I'm doing these things as a result of what I wanted to do and not receiving help. See, I can look back now on my life and see where God placed people to help me, and I pushed them away. And I was almost afraid to get better, I believe. And I did that for a very long time. And then one night, I just couldn't get drunk no more. And there wasn't really nothing left in the world for me to be around. I was about 32, 33 years old. And every day was the same thing for me. I'd get up in the morning and I'd go get what I need. I'd pass out and I'd get up in the morning and I'd do it again. And through the course of the day, God would show up for me in different ways and different peoples and different things I saw. I didn't know it then, I know it now. And so on April 4th, 1995, around 2 o'clock in the morning, I started to climb up a bridge. And I made it to about 150 feet in the air. And it was over. I was about 130 pounds of bright yellow. I had hair down to my butt and scabs all over me. And I knew it was going to be over soon. And as I'm climbing up the beam of the 7th Street Bridge in downtown Pittsburgh to end my life, I could hear a voice in my head. And I just kept on climbing because I was broken. I really believe today the only way that you experience the joy of life is to experience death first, spiritual death and emotional death. And I met God on the way to hell. And I got up to the middle of that bridge, and I just got to stand up, and I sneezed. And instead of falling into the water, I fell backwards. And I hit my head on a beam, and I laid on the concrete. And just at that same time, 3 o'clock in the morning, an ambulance comes driving by and picks me up. And I spent 34 days in a coma. And I woke up out of that coma. Now, mind you, what are the odds of me sneezing? Now I know what it was. See, God wasn't done with me. But I think God had to get me to a place where I would listen and pay attention and lose my ego and my pride and get humbled. The fact that I sneezed at that moment and fell the other way is an absolute miracle. I don't think you could do it again if you tried. I woke up out of the coma, and there was a woman sitting in my room, and she was from a 12-step program. She told me that she loved me. And she was going to sit there every day with me and help me. And I said, lady, I don't want any help. I don't deserve any help. But right before I sneezed, I remember saying a prayer. And the prayer went something like this: just please kill me. Just don't let me suffer no more. I don't know the answers, but I just don't want to live like this no more. And I remember saying that so clear to me. And this woman, I believe, who was sent by God, told me what was wrong with me. And she started talking a lot about alcoholism. And I had seen alcoholism in my family because my father was a raging alcoholic. And many people in my family suffered from alcoholism. And most of my family were hypocrites. They would talk about God and live in moral or spiritual lives, but to do the opposite of what they believed. And I thought that was okay. So I did what they did. I thought everybody lied. I thought everybody was dishonest. I thought most people never had integrity or morals, that you just did what was best for you, and you didn't worry about anyone else. And then shows this woman, and she starts to talk to me about life and God, and she starts to tell me that she's a recovering alcoholic. And for some reason, because I think when you're broken and the light can shine into your heart, you start to pay attention finally. And I said, lady, there's nothing left for me to live for. Nothing. And I guarantee you, if you let me out of this hospital, I will do it again. And she said, I understand that, but I'm going to be here every day and we're going to talk. And that woman came back every day. And I don't know, it was like a week before I was getting ready to get discharged. She asked if we could pray together. And I said, if you would like to pray, I will pray with you. And it's funny because you said the Lord's Prayer. That's what we prayed. And something happened on the inside of me that I really can't explain. And sometimes I can feel it today, but there was something definitely changed on the inside of me. Now, we talk about a spiritual awakening or a spiritual experience in the 12-step program, and I believe that's what it was. Because for the first time in my life, I felt that maybe I had a purpose. I thought that maybe everything that I had been through, all the adversity and pain and the bad choices and the losses, maybe, just maybe it wasn't for nothing. And if this woman is going to take time out of her day to come and talk to me and treat me with kindness, see, I don't know how to receive kindness back then because no one was ever kind to me. And if you were kind to me, I had to get rid of you. The one thing that really scared me probably more than God was love. Don't love me. Every person that's ever loved me left me or hurt me. And I have this belief system, and it's been built in since I was a little child. You're never going to be enough, Michael. Even if you find God, you're just never going to be enough. You're going to be one of those people that die and no one ever misses them. And I'm okay with it because I can never see myself getting past there. And so I started speaking with this woman. And I think we all meet people in our travels along the way where they kind of shine a light of God on you. And then you take a choice of whether you like to do that or not. And for once in my life, I let another human being help me. And we sat there, and when we said the Lord's Prayer, they got chills. I got chills when we said it in here because it was the moment. And I think everybody has to have a moment in their life where they say, you know what, I've had enough. I've had enough. I don't know where I'm headed, but I've had enough of what I had. And I didn't know that I could stay sober. I really didn't even believe drinking was the problem. And according to this woman, it wasn't. I was the problem. And what she told me was that I was a selfish, self-centered, arrogant person. And that the only way I was going to get better is to understand that alcohol was not my problem, that I was the problem, and that I will always be the problem. And if I let my mental health go untreated, I'll never be able to stay sober. And I had been to a treatment center and detoxes and psych wards. I know what you do there. And when it came time for me to discharge, I asked that woman, Whatever she says to do, I will do. And the doctor came in the room and said, it's time to discharge. And after 50-some days in a hospital, not having a drink, I thought I was saved. And he said, you can leave here, or we have a place called Cove Forge, which is a treatment center. It's up in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and it's for people like yourself. And I said, I have no money. They said, you don't have it. You don't worry about it. And I was a product of the state. And I asked that woman, her name was Gloria, what do you think I should do? She said, I think you should go to treatment. So I went. And what I come to find out, I walk into a treatment center and I think I know everything and I think I know what's best for me, and I'm a very angry person. But down deep inside, I have a whole lot of fear about who I am as a man and where I'm headed. But for once in my life, there was something on the inside of me. And I met a man there. He was one of the patients. He was friends with the janitor. And one day the janitor took me and this man into a room. It had stained glass windows just like that. I'll never forget it. And he said, God spoke to me this morning about you two. And we were actually roommates. He said that God asked him to pray with us and to pray over us. And I had never had that done before. And my roommate Tommy looked at me, and I said, you know what, I have nothing to lose. And a janitor with a 5th grade education, who was also a recovering alcoholic, prayed over me. And for the first time in my life in a very long time, I cried. And I cried a lot. And I started to realize that maybe, just maybe, down deep inside where I don't want to take a look because I'm looking for these external solutions to make me happy. Maybe happiness is on the inside. And maybe that's where God lives. Maybe I'm looking for an external solution for an internal problem. Maybe I should stop trying to make the flesh so happy and find out about my soul and my heart. And maybe I should surrender to the fact that although I drink and have mental health problems, I can be a good person. And I was diagnosed with bipolar. Back then, they didn't really talk a lot about it. And I was put on medications and I started to feel better. And I'm not going to get into all of my drinking. I'm just going to tell you that when the day I left to live that treatment center, I had a therapist that was in that treatment center, and she wasn't very kind. And she told me the truth about who I was. And I had such a big ego, and I was still so self-centered and so selfish. But something had changed on the inside of me, and I didn't know what. In fact, it scared me. It scared me because for once in my life, I touched this thing called peace. And I thought the only way you could get peace was by drinking a beer and smoking a joint. And for the first time in my life, I was okay in my own skin. And there was this little room at this treatment center. They called it the quiet room, a praying room. And I went inside. And I knew prayers because I had been raised in a church. I never believed, but I went. And I said a prayer. And they had the St. Francis prayer. I don't know how I came across it, but it was sitting right in front of me. And I had never saw that prayer before. And I said that prayer. And I cried through the whole thing. And I left that treatment center, and I was sent to York, Pennsylvania to live in a sober house. And I started to do things in a 12-step program, and I started to realize that my life had meaning. And I can see now, maybe like some of you in your younger years, I could see now where God had placed people over and over and over, and I just refused to be open to it. I was just so angry at God. And I got to a place where I stayed broken. I'm broken today. I moved into that sober living house. I had to go to jail sober for a felony that I had committed. and I didn't drink. I was audited by the IRS and still am, and I don't drink. I'm going to tell you a few things that have happened to me along this journey. 8 years ago, I was diagnosed with stage 3 kidney cancer. It's terminal. They told me I would never leave the hospital. And I was around 18 years sober. And I had built up a good support group, and I trusted and believed in God with my whole heart and soul. And I remember leaving that doctor's office. And I didn't say this to anybody, but I had it in my head. And I said, if I'm going to die, I'll die my way. I'm going to go back to drinking. And fortunately, there were enough people in my life supporting me that I told them what I was thinking. So I went and I had that surgery, and it was bad. They put me up into my room. It was an 8-hour surgery. They pulled my kidney out. They cut it in half. There was a bunch of other stuff in my spleen. And as they got me back up to my room, about 2 hours of being in my room, I felt this intense pain in my back, and I didn't know what it was. And they rushed me back down for a CAT scan, and eventually an MRI. And I had an aneurysm burst in the back, and blood was pouring into my stomach. And they rushed me into trauma. And I'll never forget, because I had to be awake through the surgery. They drove a spike up through my groin so they could go up with cameras and little torches and try to stop the leak, because the blood was going into my stomach. And I remember the doctor looking up over, asking me if I had been praying, and I said, yes, sir, I've been praying. He said, you're not going to make it out of here. And I said, it's okay. Because the whole time they wanted to go get my wife, and I wouldn't let them go get my wife. I said, don't go get my wife. Don't tell her anything that's going on in here. Just let her think it's just something simple. I don't want her to worry. And they were moving me from room to room, and eventually I ended up in a room with big TVs that looked like that, and I could see everything they were doing. And when the doctor said, I can't stop the leak, there was a nurse standing to the right of me. And I'll never forget her. And she said, do you mind if I pray with you? I said, no. I said, but I want to make one thing clear. If I pass on this operating table, you make sure there was probably 50 people waiting for me. You make sure that you tell them that I said that I love them and I'm happy. And I'm finally going to go home. I'm going to be at peace with God and at peace with life, and more importantly, at peace with me. I'm not afraid of death. To this day, I'm not. I live every day to the fullest, though, because I've been around long enough to know that every day is precious, and it's a gift from God. And I believe I live my life according to being a child of God and being an example of what His power can do in a one man's life. And I believe my job, because I believe, and I see it through others, is to make the world a better place and to let you know if you're suffering and hurting, maybe you've lost your faith, maybe things have happened in your life, maybe you don't understand why. I guarantee you that through adversity and pain, because I believe all pain has purpose, when you come on the other side, God always has a blessing waiting for you. Me being able to take care of my wife, I have learned quite a few things about who I am as a man. And I changed that belief system now to realize that I do have purpose and that God can and will use me and everyone else. But I have to give Him my permission, and I have to surrender to some things. So when that doctor looked up over and that nurse started to pray, we said the Lord's Prayer. And she put her hand on my side, right where the cut was. Big stitches all the way up through this side here. And we started praying together. And as we prayed, her hand became hotter and hotter and hotter, to the point that you could feel it. If you've ever been in an operating room, it's not exactly the warmest place. They got like 9 blankets on you. I was like up in the air like this, like having a baby, and they were in there with these tools, right before we started to pray, and I don't want to over-exaggerate, but I wasn't in my body. I wasn't there. It was the weirdest thing I've ever experienced in my whole entire life. And I knew, by God, I knew what it was. I heard those things, but I never felt any pain. Nothing ever. I felt nothing, but I could tell that I wasn't there. And she started to pray. And when that hand became warmer and warmer and warmer, and at the end of the prayer, there was this thing that came over me. And the doctor looked back up over, and he said, the leak stopped. And I said, what? He said, the leak has stopped. And I looked up at the nurse. And I said, thank you. And later on, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, he came into my room and he asked me a question. He asked me if I felt it. I said, I did. I felt it. He said, I've been doing surgery for over 30 years. And I've never in a million years seen what happened in that operating room to anyone. He said, did you see the shadow? I said, well, I was a little busy at the time. I said, I didn't feel the shadow, but I felt her hand. He said, I'm going to tell you two things. From the time you and that nurse started praying, I never did a damn thing. I couldn't, but that leak stopped. I'm going to give you another little secret. Both of my OR nurses called off. That nurse is from a different hospital, and I don't even know her name. She wasn't supposed to be in the operating room that day. And if you'd like to see something really interesting, I'll show it to you. And I said, I would like that. And in an operating room, when that woman started to pray with me, a shadow came over top of her and me. And it was very distinct over top of me and her. I still have it at home. I watch it occasionally. And so I asked the doctor where the nurse was or where she's from. And he said, I got something else to tell you. I don't know. And I searched for a year to find that nurse in all the hospitals in York, Pennsylvania. And what I've come to find out, and maybe believe it, maybe it's not, I don't know. I don't believe there was a nurse ever there. I believe there was an angel. And more importantly, I believe it was sent from God. And when I tell that story, I get goosebumps because from where I was in my addiction and my mental health, from where I was, I wanted to die every day. And I hated God. Oh my God. And I wanted nothing to do with religion and beliefs and obeying. I was done with it. I knew beyond a shadow of doubt, and long before that happened to me anyway, that God had sent her. So if you struggle with faith from time to time, I think that's normal. When you go through adversity, the first thing that I want to do is I want to try to fix everything on my own, right? And it just says, be still. It says, just be still and wait, right? And I've learned over the years just to be still. See that daughter that I was talking to you about? 2 days ago, after a lot of years, she sent me pictures of my granddaughter and said, Merry Christmas. And we had a conversation. And that's a miracle. I'm overpaid, man. Like, that's a miracle. And I've been praying every night on my knees. I pray on my knees every night and every morning. I pray on my knees all the time. And I don't get on my knees for God. I get on my knees for me to remember where I came from. That song, Amazing Grace, the man that want nothing to do with anything but to die, that guy. I get on my knees all the time because I believe if you get on your knees, you can stand to anything that God, and life's not always easy. It just isn't. The fact that my daughter wrote me is an absolute miracle. 2 years ago, and Joe mentioned a little bit about it, I was cutting the grass in my front yard, and I fell this high, straight on my lumbar, and I crushed my spine. And I crushed the L3, 4, and 5. They rushed me into, they had to pick me up and rush. It was crazy. And I got into the room, and they're like, we're going to do surgery on you. For some reason, I didn't feel that to be right. And by that time, my sponsor was there, who's someone that helps you in a 12-step program. And he said, why don't you just let them get you stable, and we'll go from there. And I said, okay, because I didn't want anybody cutting my back open. And so for the next year, I had so much pain going down my legs every time I walked. Jill saw me. Every time. And I would get up every morning and I would ask God to take that pain away. And every night I'd go to bed and I couldn't sleep. I was in more pain. And they put me on medications that made me feel funny. It was a mess, but I just kept showing up. And one day I was at a meeting, and I shared about my neuropathy and my pain and the nerve damage, and I guess I'm going to have back surgery. And I think once you have back surgery and they put rods in your back, it's pretty much over. And the man actually turned out to be a neurosurgeon. Imagine that. Another coincidence. And he said, I know this guy that does ablations. It's a new process. He said, I'll give you his name and his number. Why don't you call him up? So I did. And after 3 months, the pain went away, and I was on no medications. I think God wants to make sure. I think God rewards obedience. I think he just wants to make sure, do you really trust me? Like in those dark times, like right now my wife is suffering severely. We're going through a lot of things, right? And I've been through a lot of things in sobriety and life in the last 28 years. And I look out over before I knew the truth about what God was and how he showed up and how arrogant and selfish I really was. And here's the thing, my ego and my arrogance can return, and I can start taking credit for the things that are good in my life. And what I've come to believe today is they're on loan from God. And then sometimes God's gifts and blessings doesn't show up the way that I want them to. And sometimes he makes you wait because I don't believe he has a calendar. I believe he just wants to see. And I've tried to be as faithful to God as possible because I know it's only by his love and grace that I stand here. And I work in the same field, in the same place that Jill works at, Every day I get to meet people who are suffering from mental health and drug problems. And they come from broken families and they're beaten down in life. And they don't think life has anything to offer them. And they've never experienced any kind of happiness like me. I was never a child. I wasn't one of those kids at 10 years old that went out and played baseball and softball. And I was one of those kids that hid in his room and played invisible tent. I was too afraid to go outside because I was bullied most of my life. So I invented visible things so that I wouldn't be hurt, and I protected myself all the time. And now I get to talk to people who come in just like me. And I don't have to push my belief system on them. I don't have to try to convince them of anything. I just have to show them. I share my experience of what happened to me. And if you choose to do these things in your life, it can happen for you. And some do and some don't. And it's a very rewarding progress. It's better than a paycheck. On Father's Day, which is my worst day probably, I get nothing less than 70, 80 cards and text messages from former clients and patients. And they call me Dad. And they say, thank you. My wife has a son. He was a Navy SEAL. And he did 3 tours in Iraq. He was over there when they caught bin Laden. He has 4 children. They're 12, 10, 8, and 6. And they call me Pap. And Jeremy calls me Dad because his father was a heroin addict and he died in prison. And he knows my story. And my daughter-in-law loves me to death. And next weekend, he owns Subways down at, they live on the Eastern Shore, so they have to go away for a conference. And they have no one to watch their kids. So he called me. And obviously my wife can't travel. So next weekend, pray for me. Because I'm going to be watching 4 kids. I have no idea what they do. From the text messages, we're going to be baking cookies, playing checkers, dominoes, pizza, and God knows what else. Here's the joy, though, right? They never saw me drunk. They know all about me, but they never saw that guy. And I pray they never do. And they call me Pap. And at night, when we go down there, see, I kneel and I thank God for my sobriety. And I thank God for changing me into the man I am. And more importantly, I ask him to keep me humble, keep me right-sized, and always allow me the ability to accept the help from other people. And let me be an example of your love. Kindness is so overlooked, man. I was coming here. There's a Turkey Hill down here. I passed you up, by the way. I went right past you. But there was a man down here at Turkey Hill. He was a homeless man. He had the same sign I had. And people were going right past him. I watched. And I walked up. He was sitting right on the curb. And I walked up to him and I sat down next to him. And I said, "How you doing?" And you know what he said? He said, "I can't remember the last time someone sat down and talked to me." I said, "I know, because I was homeless. And I sat on a curb. And people used to pass me by like I didn't exist. But I want you to know that you're a child of God and you're loved. And there's anything that I can get for you right now, I will get it for you." And he said, "I haven't eaten in over a day, and I need water." And I said, "Come with me." He said, "They won't let me in the Turkey Hill." I said, "You just come with me." And we went in that Turkey Hill, and they didn't say nothing. And I bought him like 4 hot dogs. He said, "I'm really hungry." I said, "What do you like?" He said, "Hot dogs." I'm like, "All right, man, grab them." And he grabbed like 4 hot dogs, a big bottle of Gatorade. I said, "Dude, whatever you want, man. Like whatever you want. And I want you to know that you're loved. And if you ever need help, you call this number. And I'll come from anywhere to help you." You know why? Because people did it for me. That's why. Because without the people that God sent for me, where would I be? So who am I to walk away from a man even though he may have made bad choices? I don't know. But who am I to turn away from a man that God may have just put in my face just to make sure that I'm doing what he asked me to do? And in doing that, those hot dogs meant nothing, but in doing that and giving that man love, I receive love back. And I know there's a God at work daily. And when I get home, my wife's going to be able to get out today, and I'll end with this, right? Guess where she wants to go? Starbucks. We're going to Starbucks. She hasn't had a Starbucks like in 6 weeks, right? So I get to take my wife to Starbucks. And maybe that's not a real big deal for a lot of people, but for a guy like me, it's an honor. Because for the first time in my life, I'm not in a relationship to get something. I'm in a relationship to give something. It's called unconditional love. And I'm going to treat my wife like the woman that she deserves to be treated like. And I want to thank you all for having me. It's been a pleasure and an honor to stand here and speak. on behalf of God. Thank you.
Mike, may we pray for you? Lord, thank you for bringing Mike our way. Thank you for his commitment, his faithfulness to your work in his life, and for his sharing his story with us. May it open our hearts and our minds, Lord. Continue to bless him in all that he does. In the awesome name of Christ we pray. Amen.